3 years ago, when I was informed that after 16 years at Christchurch Dingley that my time there would not be extended, and even though I knew this was the right decision at the time, it still came as a shock. No longer was it just something out there in the future that would happen someday. It was happening right there and then. Our settled life would be disturbed. We would have to move, find another suitable position. Would I be up to the task? How would this affect my wife's work? We would no longer be surrounded by the people we had come to love and who loved us. Change is, of course, a natural and inevitable part of life. Sometimes we choose it, and sometimes it's imposed upon us. The circumstances of how the change comes greatly affects the impact it has upon us emotionally, mentally, and even physically. Change most often entails some level of grief, of loss, of things valued, things familiar, things treasured. Grief is defined as the emotional response to loss, real or perceived. All sorts of loss, from the death of a loved one to the loss of business or a job, or just to the loss of physical capacity, not just, but all sorts of loss that can occur, the loss of a friendship through a breakdown in relationship. Some things, during times of change, some things we value may no longer be as they were or will happen in a different way, allowing new possibilities. Alongside of our inevitable grief, though, however, can also be excitement, anticipation of new opportunities, new experiences, new freedoms. Our feelings can be mixed, yet the grief needs to be acknowledged for us to help understand our response, whether it be anxiety or sadness or withdrawal, even anger along the way, all signs of grief. I might add that it is with great joy that we are here. In the changes we envisage at St Michael's, though not at this point clear in all their detail, there will be some level of grief because roles will change, certain styles of service may change, or we might not have the same service time. We don't know all this aspects of how it works out. That's a discussion that we can all be part of. Yet there will also be excitement and relief and gratitude and renewed hope. As a praying friend, who's someone who prays for us. She's from another church, but she committed herself to pray for me and for this church. And she believed God was saying to her over a year ago the word resurgence, that God was, in his heart, was planning a resurgence of the life and the ministry of this church, well before we were thinking about current plans. This is what Jesus sought to prepare his disciples for, change, him not being there at that last Passover meal. And Jesus speaks obscurely, not at this time spelling out the detail, although he had previously, hadn't he, clearly predicted his rejection by the Jewish leaders, his arrest, his mocking and his death and his resurrection, but they couldn't take it in. He said to them on this occasion, "In a little while you will see me no more. And then after a little while you will see me." He spoke, of course, of his death and resurrection. Jesus had already been preparing them in this very passage, chapter 16, the earlier verses, that he would be returning to the Father and assuring them that his leaving was for their benefit, for their good. Because unless he departed to be back with the Father, the Holy Spirit wouldn't come, who would not only be with them, but in them. Now, he specifically addresses his approaching arrest and death warning them that while the world, that is the forces of darkness and those opposed to God's truth and holiness, would be rejoicing, they would be weeping and in mourning. But he wants them to know that even amidst their sorrow, their pain will be fleeting and will give way to great joy, joy that no one can take away from them. And he uses the powerful image of a woman in labour, which many of you will be able to identify with. Ros and I have recently taken to watching Called the Midwife. It's, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a lovely ABC series, English series about Nonatus House, which is a religious order of nuns who are also midwives and non-religious who are part of their staff, and they care for the local community in terms of helping them when they're expecting. And there are plenty of babies born. I don't know how they do it, but it looks very real. And so we see there the travail and the pain that women must endure to reach for the birth of the child to arrive, but then wonderfully depicted the joy of mother and father and grandparents too at the birth of a new child. What an apt picture for Jesus to use of what the disciples were about to experience in the devastating loss of their close friend, their rabbi, the Lord, and with him all their hopes and dreams about what the Messiah would bring, all their sense of hope in terms of the role that they would play in that. The loss of their close friend. Yet this change was being brought about for a loving purpose, for an amazing purpose way beyond their imagining, in which multitudes, and for the generations to come, of many nations would come to faith in Jesus, experience his hope, his healing, a whole new direction in their lives, and the power to bring about change where there's injustice, a whole range of things. And Jesus promised that they would see him again and that they would rejoice with a joy no one could ever take away from them. Now, the letter to the Hebrews in chapter 12 speaks similarly of Jesus' own agony, instructing us to fix our eyes upon Jesus, who for the joy that lay before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Jesus himself, for the joy set before him, endured the cross. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus. And I believe that in whatever time of change or grief at whatever level, this is the posture that we are called to and the attitude we're to bring to those situations in which we feel some sort of loss, to fix our eyes on Jesus, that as we seek to be obedient to him, even when things are imposed on us or something we choose, to anticipate the joy and the purpose for what is taking place. Nor are we powerless or victims in times of change. We are rather partners with God at all times, listening for the voice of the shepherd and following where he leads. Jesus said to his disciples, "I tell you the truth, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name." Now, this is such an important promise, and it implies a command. Whatever you ask in my name. The command is ask. If any of you lacks wisdom, ask for it, James said, and God will give generously without finding fault. James likewise says, not necessarily pertinent in our situation, but he says, "Why are there fights and quarrels among you? You want something and you don't have it, and you don't have because you do not ask." So James repeats that, and Jesus said, "Ask and you will receive, that your joy will be complete." That's his promise. Is that your experience? There are many prayers that I'm waiting to see the answer, and there are many in which that joy has been received, the answer comes. So we're on a journey, aren't we? And it's always a process to go with prayer and its answers and the joy that Jesus gives. We can't stop change and loss happening in our lives. It's how we grow, isn't it? But we can ensure that we not only survive it, but grow through it as we listen to the voice of the shepherd and ask him concerning whatever needs or fears we might experience along the way. And he will open for us a whole new vista of reality and fruitfulness in our lives that will bring us into a joy we never dreamed possible. Such was the experience of his first disciples, which is fully played out in the book of Acts. As you read it, you see the joy that came to them. And given Jesus is the same yesterday, today and forever, such can be our experience. Over the next 2 weeks, I'm inviting everyone here to participate in a focus on prayer. And it's customary and timely for us to devote the 10 days between Ascension, which occurs this Thursday, and Pentecost, which is only 3 weeks away, as did the first disciples. Remember, Acts chapter 1, they devoted themselves to prayer in the temple each day, 120 of them, including the women, it says. To assist us, we have put together a daily prayer guide, which you'll receive as you leave today. Here it is. And it has readings from the lectionary and prayer suggestions for each day, for our church, for the community in which we live, for our nation and for the world. Each day has a particular focus. And it also includes in the front our mission prayer and a prayer of a hope and a future, which is our prayer for the current negotiations working through joining with City on a Hill. And so I encourage us to use those prayers daily. And I don't know if it's occurred to you, but it certainly occurred to me. We've been praying the mission prayer for just over a year now. And I wonder if we're actually in the process of seeing God answering it way beyond our imagination. So I commend this guide, and on Thursday, Ascension Day, we are also having a communion service over here to celebrate Jesus' ascension and the significance of that event, which often gets overshadowed by Christmas and Easter and Pentecost, but is very significant in itself, and followed by morning tea. Next week, not this one coming, but the following week, there will also be opportunity for us joining together on Zoom for just 10 minutes of prayer at 5 p.m. in the evenings, Monday to Thursday. So there's details about that in the prayer guide. So what I'm encouraging us to do is actually bring our normal life of prayer into a focus and an earnestness and expectancy. Because as I read through church history and read biographies, and even this weekend I've picked up a little book with the story of how healing rooms began. And healing rooms is a movement of healing all around the world. It started in a place called Spokane in America in 1999. But actually, way back at the turn of the century, a man by the name of John G. Lake operated healing rooms in Spokane, which is in Washington. And hundreds of thousands of people received verified healings through that ministry. Now, as I read this book, the frequency of prayer and of fasting, and over lengthy periods of fasting, of the people who God called to sow the seed for this ministry, to find resurgence. So I want to encourage us, in the words of Jesus, ask and you'll receive that your joy may be full. That means getting serious about prayer, about asking with earnestness, with expectancy, with persistence, because God answers the prayers of his persistent, faithful people who keep bothering him, because he loves to be bothered by his children, especially as we ask according to his will and purpose. Until now, Jesus said, you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete.